We've attempted to bring some clarity and perhaps correct our picture of Abraham's nephew Lot. Whatever we might say about him, he's a main character in the story of Abraham, and consequently, he's a main character in Scripture. We've seen Lot, like Abraham, leave his extended family, his tribe, his culture in Ur of the Chaldees to make the long trip to Canaan. There can hardly be any other explanation other than that he believed God's call on Abraham and his promises to him. Along the way, Lot endured famine, survived the displeasure of the Pharaoh of Egypt, successfully navigated a range war between his herdsmen and those of Abraham as they competed for resources to feed and maintain their rapidly growing flocks and herds. Lot experienced being captured during a clash between warring kings, only to be rescued by Abraham and his men. Then we see Lot with a family living in the city of Sodom. We watched as he intercepted strangers coming into the city, boldly defying all the men and boys of Sodom face to face and alone, decrying their wickedness. They were men who were determined to do violence to achieve their goals. The strangers who came to Lot revealed their mission: to destroy Sodom and all the cities of the plain and the whole Jordan Valley itself. Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters are physically escorted out of the city and told to flee for their lives and so escape the coming wrath of God. We ended our session last week with these words from Genesis 19, and I encourage you to use your Bibles this morning, Genesis 19, 23 through 29. Lot was allowed to flee to a little city, a little town called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. Before we finish this section of Genesis, we need to examine one more point. Verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So, in everything we've studied so far, up to this point, what do we know about Lot's wife? I hear laughter, but I don't hear any answers.
Ray said she's salty.
Well, she's salty now, but before she's turned to a pillar of salt, what do we know about her? Nothing. We don't know her name. We don't know where she came from. We don't know if she's a Canaanite. We don't know if she's a Semite from the same culture as Lot. We don't know if she's a Chaldean. How old was she? We don't know. She's old enough to have marriageable daughters, but aside from that, we don't know anything about her. What do we know anything that might stand in her favor? She left with her She left with her husband, which means she was married to Lot. That could be considered a good thing, huh? Even though marriages were arranged. She married Lot. We know that much about her. What else do we know?
She put up with him, allowed him to drag her into Sodom for crying out loud.
Okay, she stayed with him. Yeah, sure. That's a good thing. What's that? Yeah, that could have been. He could have found her in the city of Sodom. That may have been where she was from. We don't hear any mention of her until he's in Sodom. But yeah, she's put up with a lot of things. She's already been captured by an invading king and carried away as plunder. So she's put up with that. What else do we know? Okay, yeah. The men of the town, Lot offered his daughters to the men of the town in exchange for the safety of the strangers that came to him. She went through that. That must have been crazy. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing we know is that, as we said about Lot, he managed to raise 2 daughters, and they remained virgins in the wickedest city on the face of the earth. And she must have helped with that. She must have been part of that. Okay, so she appears in this one chapter. She's only mentioned twice. Once when the angels include her among those that Lot is to flee the city with, and in this verse. Now, having gone through the story of Lot from the beginning to the end, we're almost at the end, how would you describe her part in the story? Is she the main point of the story? No. This is almost mentioned as an aside, and yet, like I said before, in Sunday school, you'd think that the whole point of the story of Lot, sorry, we're in Sunday school. I mean in children's Sunday school, when you were a kid, you'd think the whole point of the story of Lot is don't look back. So what does it mean? What does it mean to look back? Is it a literal terms that means don't physically turn around and don't look back? Or is it a metaphor for something else? Metaphor. Okay, why? What's that? A yearning? Okay. So what gives you the idea that it might be a yearning? Yeah, so she looked back. So it means that she was, it's interesting, okay? In the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint was written during the silent period of the Bible, between the Old and the New Testament. Okay? And it was written by Hellenic Jews. Jews in the ancient world were separated into 2 pieces. Jews that lived in the area of Babylon and continued to speak Hebrew and Aramaic, and the Jews that lived in the Greek-conquered world when it was conquered by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great developed great libraries all over his kingdom, and he expressly brought in other cultural materials. And one of those things, one of the reasons we have full Old Testaments today was because Alexander the Great deposited in his libraries Greek copies of the Old Testament. Okay? So anyway, in the Septuagint, the word for look back means to look back with desire. Okay? I don't know why our versions don't put that. I guess it gives the idea in the text. Maybe they think it's redundant, but that's what the word epistrepho means. It means to look back with desire. Okay. Yes.
In children's church and everything, it always appeared that as they were fleeing, she looked back, like as they're just outside the city. But I'm reading it here now, by the time they reached Zor, so did she reach Zor with him, possibly?
Possibly.
They reached Zor, and then the fire came down, and then she turned and looked back.
Yeah. So yeah, the idea is that they reached the little town that they were supposed to flee to, and when they reached that town, she looked back. And that's when the fire started raining down. Yeah.
Might just to emphasize your point, because a couple verses later it talks about Moses or Abraham waking up and looking back. When nothing happened there.
Right.
His observations of the destruction had a completely different mindset, I guess.
Right.
In contrast.
Right. So you have the contrast between Abraham, who also looked back toward Sodom, and the contrast is with her, Lot's wife, who looked back. She was turned to a pillar of salt. Abraham wasn't. So we know that it wasn't a literal just turning around and looking, and that Abraham did it with a different heart than she did. Yes, ma'am.
I think sometimes, especially women, when you don't know what's ahead or what to expect, it's easy to think, I don't want to go forward, I want to stay where I am. Because I'm comfortable here, this is a no, that's an unknown. And it's easy to just sit where you are instead of branching out to something that you don't know. And I think maybe that was part of her. I know as a woman that, when we had to move or whatever, and I didn't want to, but God had a different plan. And I think maybe that's part of what she was doing.
Okay. Yeah, that could be. That could be. We don't know, but let me go on here. So I think maybe what Lot's wife was saying, well, before we go there, I'm trying to word this right. So let's bring in the context of this verse, okay? Because if we're going to make an application to our own lives from the life of Lot's wife or the death of Lot's wife, we need to make sure that we read the verse correctly. Okay? So my question is if we bring the context to bear, for us, when exactly are we not to look back? What's the context of her looking back? Gerard.
I've been thinking about, a little bit earlier in the passage, and the angels told Lot to go to the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to go to the city. The angels told him to leave the plane, get out of the plane. But he went to a city in the plane.
Yeah, we're not at that question yet.
Well, you're talking about Lot's wife.
Right.
And so I'm thinking, she, I'm assuming, witnessed that. So if Lot didn't listen to what he was instructed to do, now they did give him permission eventually to go there. But that had to put some doubt or question in her mind as to what she could do or what she couldn't do.
But she knew she wasn't supposed to look back.
She did.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's exactly my point. And if it's a penalty for disobedience, disobedience to what? Don't look back. And I guess my point is this a warning against just general disobedience? A warning against double-mindedness? Because if it is, we're all guilty. We've all been generally disobedient. We've all been duplicitous. We've all been double-minded at some point. What makes this situation different? Yes, sir.
Could it be that she looked back with remorse in her heart for leaving because she really enjoyed being there?
Because she wanted to stay there? Yeah.
She had remorse because she left that place?
Yeah, and I think that's it. She did definitely have remorse for leaving.
You know, as we're Christians, I don't know how that can be though, if you're born again Christian, but you look back and say, man, I had a good time there. I mean, why would you even do that if you're born again Christian? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Kind of two things. The first is, I think her heart could have been similar to the time of Moses in the wilderness when they were looking back on Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, we had it so good, why did we leave?
Right.
And then the second thing is Jesus actually uses Lot's wife as an illustration when he's talking about the second coming, fleeing in Luke,
Mm-hmm.
where he says, he gives very clear instructions to us to remember Lot's wife.
Yes.
In the dangers of pausing, stopping, looking back, maybe with fond memories of the life that we once had, which is what Gary said.
Yeah.
Real similar vein throughout Scripture, I think, of all these examples.
So what is the same situationally between what Jesus said and what we see here?
Well, it's a command that they're supposed to follow.
It's a command that they're supposed to follow, but it's a command that they're supposed to follow when they're fleeing from the wrath of God. Okay? And that's, I think, the point that we need to understand here. The application, I mean, I think when Lot's wife looked back, she was saying, I would rather have what I'm leaving than what God is saving me for. I would rather have what I'm leaving than what God is saving me for. Okay? This is a judgment issue. God is pouring out his wrath on people, and you're basically, the situation is you're escaping the judgment of God of all times in the world, that you don't want to look back. It's then. And basically what she did is she revealed her heart. Yes, sir.
That's pretty much the attitude and statement of anybody who rejects the gospel.
It is.
And their end is judgment.
Yeah, and they are still under condemnation. Yes, sir.
You talk about expanding the context of what it means for her to look behind with longing.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mind immediately jumps to the conclusion, for what? What was she longing for in that place? Because we knew that place was exceedingly wicked.
Right.
It was exactly judgment. So she had to have longed for something wicked, which would have brought about that judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. Gerard.
Yeah. How is her disobedience and desire, if it truly was a desire to remain, how is that different than Lot not going to the mountain and staying in the cities and the plains? Because he was disobedient also.
Yeah. And
Even though he did request many times to go to the city,
Uh-huh.
and they finally relented and said, okay, but he was not willing to take God's word, his first word. So how we understand the difference between his wife and him.
okay, we're going to do that as soon as we get to it. So let me sum up where we are so far. Lot's escaped the destruction of Sodom and the Jordan Valley. He's escaped with, most likely, whatever he and his wife and 2 daughters have been able to carry with them. We know they weren't riding donkeys or having camels, because it says the angels led them out by hand. Okay? They were on foot. Lot's wealth, his herds and flocks, whatever worldly possessions he had acquired, were probably consumed in the fire that swallowed up the entire Jordan Valley, except for one very small town located at the southern tip of the Jordan Valley called Zoar. Lot threw in with Abraham. So far, his faith in Abraham's call and the God Abraham believed in, so far, his faith has cost him dearly. But we've got 8 more verses to cover. We're going to get there. Let's read Genesis 19, 30 through 38. Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, I'm going to get quiet because I don't want little ears to hear upstairs. Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father. That night, they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you can go in and sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father. So they got their father to drink wine that night also. And the younger daughter went in and slept with him, and again he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today. So far, I want to know, how does this story make you feel? How does it hit you? You wouldn't want to be a Moabite or an Ammonite, okay?
It's interesting how they're I guess, it doesn't say it, but you would expect that coming from Sodom and Gomorrah, they've been sort of stained or seared by sin.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that they acquired was wine. They didn't
Okay.
do anything. They're, in the aftermath of all this, they're going, where did you get the wine from? And why was that a priority to get wine? Just seems like that'd be like a seared conscience from maybe where they came from.
So you're saying seared conscience so you're saying that while they were in Sodom, they developed a taste for wine?
Most likely, or
Could be.
Or yeah.
Why else?
Perverse way of thinking.
Perverse way of thinking? Why do a lot of people drink? To forget.
But you don't know what the water was like there. A lot of times they drank wine because the water wasn't sanitary.
Okay, they may have been drinking wine because the water wasn't sanitary. That could be too. Okay. The girls had to get their father drunk because they knew he wouldn't consent to what they wanted otherwise. Now, they didn't seem to have any problems getting him drunk, did they? Which leads me to wonder whether or not the trauma that they had experienced was so disquieting to their soul that maybe he was in the habit recently of taking a little too much drink anyway. I don't know. We don't know. We're not told. All we can see is it seems very easy for these girls to get their father to get blind drunk.
That makes perfect sense to me.
So,
I can't imagine a trauma they would experience.
right. So I was thinking as I was going through this reminds me of Job. For those of you who are familiar with Job, he had a difficult time. Everything was taken away from him. He was put on the stage of the world, and God let Satan throw everything he had at him. But unlike Job, there isn't a happy ending here. There's heaviness, there's sadness, there's weariness, there's trauma, and we experience those feelings as we read it. But God has seen fit to include details and stories in this book that almost seem counterproductive. Don't you think? But unlike any other book on earth, God gives us stark reality. His perfection is juxtaposed over and against our fallenness, our impotence, our proneness to screw up his story. And still he works and accomplishes his plan, in spite of our weakness. I think God includes these difficult stories to remind us who we really are. And in so doing, he reminds us how much we need him and how much we depend on his grace, how he accomplishes things in spite of us and in spite of our weakness. You're up. Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. We want answers to that. Why did he leave? Why was he afraid? Sometimes we look for answers to questions that God doesn't think are important for us to know. Other times, I wonder if God doesn't spell everything out for us just to get us to think about it a little bit. We don't know why Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar, even though he was given permission to go there to escape destruction. So here we go. We're going to think about it. Why might Lot have been afraid to stay in the town of Zoar? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he didn't want a repeat of his experiences in Sodom. And Zoar was one of the cities of the plain that was just as tainted with sin as Sodom was. It could be, I think this is what you're saying, that Lot went from being too accepting of the sin around him to going through the conflagration that God rained down, and all of a sudden becoming maybe very sensitive to the sin that was around him. Yes, sir.
Another thought is this, Lot and his daughters was the only one that survived Sodom. So Lot goes into Zoar, and the people of Zoar are like-minded to the people of Sodom. They're going to be a bit suspicious of Lot and his daughters.
Okay.
You two only got out, or you three only got out. And then they realize that Lot served the living God. There's going to be opposition. He's going to fear.
Okay. So like the people of Sodom, the people in Zoar would have recognized right away that Lot's faith made him different than them. Okay? Okay. That could be. He fled Zoar because he didn't fit in. Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes, thinking how it applies to us, sometimes when God's told us to do something and we know we're supposed to do it, and we challenge him and argue and take a detour,
Mm-hmm.
and he lets us go on that detour.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoar was a detour. God let Lot go on It's not all that.
Right.
I get back on the right road.
Okay.
So maybe the fear of the discomfort was from the Holy Spirit telling you, hey, I told you not to come here. I let you come here. Now, are you ready to listen?
Okay. So it could have been a change of heart and a desire to be obedient to God. Okay? That does happen. Sure.
Jonah, but also he just had a wife that turned to a pillar of salt because she looked pure for the wrong things. He didn't want his daughters to do the same thing, be affected by
Sure.
or himself.
So basically, the example of his wife may have made him afraid to make the wrong move, and he decided to go up to the mountains anyway.
His two daughters left,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want the same thing in every woman.
Okay.
Led, and that's all he has left.
So he may have been protecting his daughters. He was afraid of what might happen to them. And himself. Yes, sir.
Probably left the town there and go over to Zor, and everyone's going, well, you're the only survivors from Sodom over there. The people probably wouldn't be suspicious of him. That might happen to us.
Sure.
Probably not, wouldn't be welcome.
Okay.
Ask him where he's from. Well, no one else is from there. What's up with that?
Yeah. So maybe they weren't welcoming of him because of that he had come from Sodom. Yeah. Okay. So, Zor was a city in the plain originally scheduled for destruction because of its gross immorality. Lot may have gone from being too tolerant of sin or to becoming oversensitive or getting a proper sensitivity to sin. The other thought I had was maybe he had the yips. Okay, does everybody know what the yips is? Yeah, what are the yips?
It's like you're standing over a putt, kind of do the herky-jerky thing before you putt, and you usually miss the putt.
Okay, so it's getting anxious or nervous about a situation, over nervous, and you miss making the putt when you're golfing. People say that the football players get the yips when they have a really bad game. They're worried something's going to happen, whatever. So he may have gotten the yips because he was haunted by recurring tragedy in his life, the loss of his wife. He just may have felt out of, when you feel like you're not in the right place, unexplainably. We don't know. Maybe he had the yips. So let's go from this. It's time to let in another elephant. Okay? Many people suggest that Lot's daughters committed incest with their father because of their exposure to the wickedness they experienced in Sodom, which is probably true to some point. We can't escape that, can we? The sin that's around us, well, like I said last week, we're like the frog in a pot. And the water just keeps getting hotter, and we just sit there oblivious to the heat because our body temperature's changing at the same time, and we're happy. Up to this point, these two girls had the moral caution and character to remain virgins. I don't think their dad locked them up and put a chastity belt on them. Okay? In verses 31 and 32, they listed their concerns. Let's look at them real quick. It says, one day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." So I see 4 concerns. What are they? Lot's age. Daddy is old. What else? There are no men. Where did they go?
Well, it's not that there's no men, there are no suitable.
Maybe. Were there men living on the plain of the Jordan? Yes, there were. I don't think there were any men there. God rained down sulfur and destroyed everything, killed all the men, made the ground so nasty that you can't grow anything in it or put any crops or herds on it. Nobody would go there.